Okay. My name is Jason Gilmore. I'm the president of the Dauphin Rail Museum, basically the birthplace of Canadian Northern Railway. And I'm sitting in Manitoba's most beautiful rail station currently. And on the other line here, I have Bill Walker. And Bill, if you just introduce yourself a little bit here, and I'll get into kind of why we're conducting this interview.
Well, I will do so, and thank you very much, Jason, for the invite and for the opportunity of being able to expand a little bit on my family involvement in the railroad and their association and closeness to Dauphin. So, yeah, let's talk and see what we can put on the table here.
Absolutely. So, first off, in the more immediate, we just released a press release regarding your immediate family's contribution to the Dauphin Rail Turntable exhibit. So
Right.
you were kind enough to donate $1,000 to the project, and I'll talk a little bit more about that project. But why did you feel it was important to contribute to this project?
Well, there's several reasons. First off, and obviously, uh, my family, the Walker family, and going back to William Albert association with there, but even further, and I'm going to expand a little bit, going back to
Mhm.
William is grandfather, James Walker, his dad, my great grandfather, also had an association. We'll touch on that, but anyway, I'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, our family has been in Dauphin since 1896. We were there when the Canadian Northern was just starting, and probably a little bit earlier, I think, even with the Lake Manitoba Canal Company.
And
And
that was in 1896. That
yeah,
dates back to 1896. Yes.
yeah. So and I'll hit on a couple of those things, but yeah, my family, my grandfather, William Albert, had five boys and one girl. All five of the boys actually ended up working for either Canadian Northern and later on for Canadian National Railway. So there's a long history, and my uncle Ross, he actually stayed in Dauphin as a machinist, and he probably was on that turntable in 1908. He would have been 19 years old. He probably started with the railroad at 18 years. Remember, his dad was in fact the locomotive foreman, W.A. Walker, and got on the same as my dad did many years later. But Ross stayed there, and the rest of his brothers actually joined the railroad as they gained in age and were able to find positions within the railroad. Most of them were engineers. Several of them were conductors, but all of them started and worked in Dauphin. So that turntable that we're talking about and the roundhouse that I had the opportunity to visit several years ago are places where they actually walked. They actually worked. Worked. They were there. They spent time there, and the photo that you have on the wall of the museum with W.A. Walker on the turntable in 1908. Underneath in the caption it says W.A. Walker, oldest man on the road, locomotive foreman, and on the first train on the turntable. My uncle was probably among that men. And if you look at the number of people that are hanging off of that locomotive and think that as locomotive foreman, my grandpa was their employer, basically. They worked for him. They worked for him. Locomotive foreman was responsible for that. And that doesn't say it was construction or anything like that, but all of the tradespeople that were associated with the steam engine worked for him. They were all there. And my family played a big role in it. And as the years went on and as Dauphin grew and the Canadian Northern grew, they all played a bigger role in it. So the turntable has a big significance, and to me is a symbol of something that I could go back and touch. I never had the opportunity of meeting my grandfather. He died in 1923, so I never had the chance to meet him. But walking on the turntable, I I could feel him. It was like, hey, I'm here too, and say hello to everybody. So yeah, well, when the opportunity came up to donate and to participate in this fabulous project, my wife and I just said we got to be there, and so there we are. And I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I would like to relate to you when it's appropriate, Jason. That
Absolutely.
further links our family to the railroad and to Dauphin. And so, anyways, I'll I'll shut up for a minute and let you inject.
No, not at all. Not at all. That's awesome. But going back to that, it was quite funny. So you were, how I connected with you when we were trying to preserve the whole turntable was you basically were friends with our former president, Durham English. And
Yes.
how did you initially meet him?
Well, and that's a story too. I'm a
I don't
model
know how
railroader.
long of it. Okay, how long of a story that is. Okay, yes.
I'm a model railroader, and I had
Okay.
got back into the hobby after being out of it for probably 30 or 40 years. And my concept was, okay, if I'm going to set something up, and I love switching and setting up. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go back to Dauphin and see if I can get a copy of the blueprints of the Dauphin
Oh,
yard. And so I sent a couple of emails, and I ended up with a phone contact for Durham, and we talked. And sure enough, he said, "Yeah, I think we can find stuff." And actually, Durham was the one that identified to me that you had the picture of my grandfather on the wall of the museum. I didn't know that, and I did not have that picture. I've got another one of the turntable and two other locomotives there, but I did not have that one. So, anyways, Durham and I talked, and I said, "Yeah, I'd be coming." And he told me that in fact the turntable was still there and the roundhouse was still there. And I said, "Gee, I would love to come up and see it." Well, he says, "My wife happens to be away for a couple of weeks. Why don't you come on up, and we'll go and have a look?" And I thought, I'm also doing family genealogy, which is how I got a lot of this information. And I thought,
okay.
there's a lot of people in the graveyard that I should stop by and say hello to and identify their gravestones and things. So I jumped at the chance and went up there and spent about I don't know, about 4 days, I think. And Durham invited me to stay at his house. So we went and we
Awesome.
we scouted around. We went to the graveyard, and we went to the CNR roundhouse and the turntable. And I got to walk into the roundhouse. And you know what? It was just like when I used to go to the roundhouse in Brandon, where my dad was locomotive foreman, and the smell. And the smell was the same. The images were the same. The steam tinted woodwork and oh my gosh, it was wonderful, just absolutely
And
wonderful.
still having staining on the ceiling, right? From
Yes,
steam locomotives, which is 60 plus years ago, the last one,
absolutely.
were in
And,
existence, which I think is
yeah,
so cool.
and then and of course that was from using the alkaline water that they had to use as they're progressing through the
Hmm.
prairies. There was very little fresh water to use, so that's where the alkaline and the white came from. But yeah, so that's how I met Durham, and that's how I got into this and found out the turntable was there and the roundhouse was there, and that was only later that we found out that the city wanted to dismantle it. So I've continued my contact,
And
and you followed up, and
yeah,
you and I have contacted for a year or so now.
and that's when we started talking. And I recall just being shocked because you had indicated that your grandfather was in that picture that you so described. And when I put this video together, we'll have that picture. It's quite famous now with all the work we've been doing with the turntable. But when you actually admit it, I had asked, who is he? Where is he in the picture? And you said, oh, he's in the cab. That just like blew me away. So
Yeah,
I just
absolutely.
thought that was incredible.
Absolutely. And, I've gone over that
So
picture
to have that
hundreds
linkage
of
with
times.
that picture.
I've gone over that picture hundreds of times. Certainly found my grandfather. That's easy. He's the engineer. He's hanging out of the window of the locomotive. But I'm looking for my Uncle Ross. As I said, he was probably 19 years of age. He was there as a laborer. He ended up as a machinist with the railroad there. But I bet you he was hanging off of that engine someplace. And at a 19-year-old, you can't tell one from another.
Yeah,
But
with the clarity, it's not the best, obviously, given the age too, right? So, but yeah, incredible linkage, and that's the one thing. And you're actually right now, we're chatting. You're in Southern Ontario, correct?
I'm in Oakville, Ontario. Yes, just outside of Toronto. Yeah,
And that's part of the story of just the history we have here. So this year being the 130th anniversary of the arrival of the first train that your grandfather would have been involved with, um, and how many people were employed by rail over the decades. And then
yeah,
you look now at extended families and the outreach, which, yes, you're still in Canada, but there's people basically all over the world that have had some sort of fingerprint on rail
yeah,
families throughout
yeah,
the 130 years,
yeah.
which
Absolutely.
is why we're so passionate about preserving this history. Because as a community, we are so blessed to have this station, that roundhouse, and still a portion of the turntable. The one positive note is that more people with this exhibit, which I'll talk about in a second, will be able to experience it. Whereas where it was located, being in an active work site, it
Yeah,
wasn't really showcased the way it could have
no,
been or should have been. So
no,
that'll be the nice thing, is being in this area where everybody can view it, everybody can experience it. So yeah, those that don't know, so Bill and his immediate family was kind enough to donate to this project. So we've got a 24-foot portion of the turntable bridge that was 84 feet in length. And
right.
we are in the process of creating an exhibit that we do have rendering pictures that I'll share on here as well. But it'll be just outside the building, outside the museum in CN Park. So yeah, any other? You said some really interesting nuggets given early days of the railway, or other
Well,
more immediate stories.
actually, I think I do, Jason.
Yeah,
After our conversation earlier this week and setting up this interview, I got asking myself, saying, "No, no, wait a minute now. My great grandfather, James Walker, he immigrated from Scotland in the early 1840s, 1850s, and he settled here in Ontario. In fact, in Whitby, just down the street from Toronto." And I'm thinking, yeah, he had 9 kids, 9 kids actually. But I'm thinking, wait a minute now, he's in Ontario. How the heck did William Albert end up in Dauphin? I mean, that's a big stretch. And started going back through
yeah,
some of my genealogy records, and James was a blacksmith, and actually so was William Albert when he first started out. Of course, working in the family business. But in fact, in the 1850s, James and probably a lot more people with that trade skill got caught up in the railroad industry. And of course, you think 1881, the CPR started in this neck of the woods.
yeah.
And in fact, probably led my great grandfather, James, to say, well, wait a minute, guys, this iron horse thing going through here is going to mean they're not going to need horseshoes and they're not going to need that thing. But it's all steel, it's all metal. They're going to need a blacksmith. And and
Yeah,
so my assumption is that James decided in his wisdom that this little blacksmith shop was going to pack up pretty soon anyway. So let's get our foot in the door of the railroad business and hooked up with the CPR. And I say that, and I can say that with some authority because James and his family, his whole bloody family, ended up moving dozens of times westward with the railroad. He was in many locations here in Ontario. Ended up in Manitoba. Worked in Dominion City in Manitoba. Well, that's where he ended up passing away. But Dominion City, and in fact moved on into Saskatchewan as the railroad moved west. And so I'm thinking, okay, so he brought the family out, and the association then, of course, with William Mackenzie and Donald Mann. Here you've got a qualified machinist, if you'd like, a blacksmith machinist, and several of James's sons ended up as engineers. And in fact, John Alexander Walker, one of William's brothers, ended up working as an engineer with the CPR, and he is noted in the National Railroad Hall of Fame in Los Angeles as, at that time, the oldest living engineer associated with CPR, and that was back in 1958, 59. But he started.
And how old was he at that time?
He was 104 when he passed away. He was 104 when he passed away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, so here we've got John Alexander, an engineer. You've got, in all likelihood, William Elford, an engineer who learned his trade with the CPR. And all of a sudden, the association now with William Mackenzie and Donald Mann is Mackenzie says, okay, we're going to start this new railroad in Manitoba. I'm looking for engineers. And William, how about coming with us? And in fact, William did come with us, and you showed us, and there is a book out that notes the involvement of William Mackenzie and they called him Billy Walker. Billy Walker as the engineer, as the first senior guy, and of course he would be because he was experienced. He ended up 46 years of age when the 1908 the turntable. So he was an experienced and qualified engineer at that time, and the association with William Mackenzie. He was one of the 7 original members of the Canadian Northern Railroad when it started in Dauphin. So we're there. We've been there. We were
right from the ground floor.
Our prints were there. We walked on that turntable. We drove those trains. My grandfather was in fact the engineer on the first locomotive that took it from Dauphin to Strathclyde on the way to Winnipeg. Of course, we didn't have running rights that way, but we exchanged in Strathclyde. And so yeah, Jason, I can't help but get excited about the prospects of hanging on to these things that are real, that you can put your hands on, you can touch, you can walk on, and they're part of the heritage. And not just the Walker family. My mom's family, the Thompsons, were also big employees of the Canadian Northern and CNR, and it just goes on and on. So yeah, it's kind of embedded in us, and love the work you're doing. We have got to succeed. We just have to succeed in this. It's too important. It's too important for many more people to be able to do what I did, to go and put your foot on that turntable and say, hey, my uncle, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my cousins, we're here. They did that. And so can you. Yeah.
And so not only instances like yourselves where you had the direct family linkage, but also you find too in heritage, pictures and stories and videos and things of that nature are great. But even for young people to get educated on how things ran, how things were built. And that's why we're always passionate, especially about the rail infrastructure here, because going back to Canadian Northern Railway, you had CPR, which is a little bit more southern linkage, and Canadian Northern. So basically, we were instrumental in opening up a lot of the the West in Canada, right? So it goes down to agriculture, commerce,
Absolutely.
immigration, like it's
Yeah.
everything, right? So the
Yeah.
linkage that you have is so amazing. Like just being at the ground floor of a fledgling railway that it's always many people don't know, and that's why we've really tried to push that narrative, being called the birthplace of Canadian Northern Railway, which
Yeah.
became Canada's third transcontinental railway by 1915. It all started here,
It
and
started.
we are a pillar of Canadian National Railway that still continues to this day. So just that linkage also, I think, is I think
Well, yeah, you're
cool, and
absolutely right.
I love it.
And it's not just Dauphin that the railroad was involved in. You think of the Iron Horses when they came out, in the 1800s, and even into the early 1900s. Jason, they could only go 80 miles, and they had to be not overhauled, but they had to have major servicing on them, not just filling them up with coal or wood or water. They had to be major looked at by experienced people to make sure that, in fact, they could do the next 80 miles or return the 80 miles they had just done. So all the little towns that we've got that are throughout Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, into BC, it's certainly all through Ontario here, it is because of the railroad. It is, they had to have these people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the case if you had two people that could look after one of these locomotives when they came. You needed to have experienced people, and dozens and dozens and dozens of them, who required additional servicing for them and their families. So all the little towns along the way are because of the railroad. And so there is a big link to all of Canada, and certainly to Dauphin, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and on west. So yeah, I'm very proud of it. Very proud of it.
And 5 years ago, when we celebrated the 125th, through some research, they'd indicated in the neighborhood of 9,500 communities across Canada created as a direct result of,
Oh,
just purely Canadian Northern Railway. So
yeah,
yeah, it's the history is incredible. Your personal family linkage is incredible, and that's the one with the latest press release that I've posted on our Facebook. Um, had to put this, and I think you had indicated this as well, where it's like Bill Walker and family with over 200 years of
yeah,
accumulated rail service for Canadian Northern Canadian National Railway. I knew that would stoke interest in folks of, but
well, that,
there are many families that had generations that worked in rail, but
yeah,
just, yeah, to have a number like that, but then going into the origins of Canadian Northern Railway and how William Albert Walker, was
yeah,
right there on day one, basically.
yeah. Well, I tell you what, I, and there's an awful lot of it, Jason, that I had not put together until recently, and yeah, it makes your heart swell. I'm very proud of the things they're done, and I got to come
And
back and back
absolutely
into
should
the
be.
graveyard and talk to all my relatives and update them as what we're done. And you know what? that sounds a little crazy, but hey, I'm sure somebody is looking down and saying that's good stuff. That's good stuff Jason's doing and Bill's doing, and we're going to keep
One
it
would
up.
hope. One would
We're going to
hope.
keep it up. Yep. Yeah.
Um, so with that, thank you so much for your time. And once again, just imploring anybody like yourself that have family members. I know financially, maybe not the best of times, but if anybody at any amount can contribute to this project, we set up a situation with the city of Dauphin that they will accept donations on our behalf for this exhibit, and they'll issue tax receipts. So
Wonderful.
we'll provide a little bit of information regarding that too. But once again, Bill, thanks so much for sharing some of your family story. I think we could go way further into this, like especially
Yes.
some of the details you've given, but maybe at a later date. But just this whets the appetite, I think, for maybe further conversations.
That is
But
wonderful.
um,
And that's wonderful. And I tell you what, you're absolutely right. There's more stories, but you know what? I think you and I need to do it face to face, and we should work on that one too. That we can celebrate the success of this project face to face, and we'll do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So couldn't agree more. So thanks again. Really appreciate you spending the time and just giving a little context of the importance of your family in Dauphin, and just you set an example of many other families that had these linkages and why they feel like preserving this history is so important. So with that, we'll conclude the interview. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Jason.